Welcome. This is a very distinct and very different episode of HealthWise. We're typically in the studios, and today we're out. And we are happy to have partnered with Ross University School of Veterinary Medicine, my employer, by the way. I'm sure most of you already know that. And we have two very good friends of mine, but also one colleague. And we are about to discuss one of the most consequential topics, I think, for men today, which is men's health in general, but more so circling a bit on prostate cancer. We were to have my dear colleague and friend, oncologist, Dr. Grant Tate. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to join us today, but I hope I can do her justice in just having a discussion around some of the men's health issues, primarily around prostate health. As I get started, there's a bit of a solemn moment for us because this particular disease hits very close to home for the Ross community. Just this weekend, we learned of the passing of a colleague of ours, and my condolences to his family and also the staff of the facilities management team who are now grappling with the news of the loss of a colleague who died from one of the diseases that we will be discussing today. In 2012, I received a book from mentor and friend of mine, and the book was titled The End of Men and the Rise of Women. I will tell you that book sat on my shelf for a couple months before I had the courage to open it, because certainly I found it to be sexist. I found it to be something that's just the very topic of it was a bit disturbing for me. On opening the book by Hannah Rosen, I discovered that it mentioned the patriarch role that men play in the family and why that was slowly being eroded. While the diseases that we'll talk about today are not necessarily the object of the book, the topic still holds true in terms of the end of men, simply because almost every disease that we look at, there's a disproportion in the way in which it's affecting men. Look at COVID-19 deaths. 10 to 20% more of the deaths were in the male gender, the male sex. 10 to 20%, that's significant. You look at suicides and mental health conditions. One of the statistics that I found particularly alarming was in St. Lucia, which is sort of my home country, and 43 deaths from suicide in the last 2 years in St. Lucia, and only 3 were women. So evidently there are some genuine concerns, and I suspect that unless we begin to find the space in which we can be comfortable as men to talk about those diseases, and more importantly to seek care when we need it most, and that's preferably before the disease sets in, as in preventive care. Unless we begin to change those attitudes, and to change those attitudes, I think we need to understand exactly what exactly is preventing men from accessing care the same way women do. We see women who are married and they get their regular checks and their pap smears every year and their mammograms, but the spouses you don't see in the doctor's office nearly enough. And there are varied reasons why that may be the case, but unless we sort of take an all-of-society approach, and especially those of us in the workspaces, the conversations we're having, I suspect we won't begin to change those attitudes. And this is why the topic today, Talk to Me Bro, is really about changing that conversation that happens around the dinner table, the conversation that takes place in the bars and ram shops and the other areas where men congregate, and how we as men can begin to have conversations that compel each other and encourage each other to actually seek help and to seek intervention, to seek advice from a medical doctor, and whatever the fears or phobias or stigmas or whatever may be standing in their way of accessing care begins to actually diminish in terms of its effect. Because unless we do that, I think we are going to find ourselves with many more fatherless homes, and many more chairs that are on the dinner table empty because the patriarch figure of that home is lost to a disease. So without any further ado, I want to introduce the two guests who both of them I suspect are very well known to the St. Kitts community, maybe for different or similar reasons, right? To my right, I have Mr. Henry Yearwood, who is the General Manager of Cost Cab Coca-Cola here on St. Kitts. I'm sure he will do a much better job at talking about who he is when we turn the mic over to him. And to my left, a colleague and friend in Mr. Lawrence Budasing, who is our Senior Facilities Manager here at Ross University. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This is a different format, but certainly not new by way of conversation. I think we have conversations ad nauseum, either via our WhatsApp chat group, right? Or either our Thursday night gatherings on the patio, wherever that may be. We find ourselves having those discussions, and I'm very grateful that that what we're doing here is nothing different from what the sort of discussions we have on the patio. I like to brag about the fact that I belong to a group of men that have no difficulty with being vulnerable. We have, being very open about some of the challenges that they face, and I think the goal of this show is to try to propagate that sort of social dynamics outside of just the patio, and hopefully we can encourage other men to engage in similar conversation that I think is very healthy. So, Lawrence, I'm going to pitch to you, and of course, if there's anything else you think I missed in terms of introducing you, by all means, this is your opportunity to do so. But do you think, first of all, that what I've said, I mean, in any way resonates with you? Do you think that there is an issue in the way in which men are accessing care? From your own perspective, in your own family, in the workplace, is there any truth to that statement? Because I don't want to be the one just taking ownership of that statement.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Pear mentioned, my name is Lawrence Budasing, Senior Manager, Facilities at Ross University. Specific to the question or the pitch that Dr. Pear made, ideally, I do agree 100% with everything you said. I mean, all recent studies and surveys have shown that at least 65% of men, or those among us, are scared to go to the doctor for whatever reason. And
Lawrence, I'll ask you a question. Is it that
Sure.
Is it that men are scared, or they haven't been socialized accordingly?
Well, either or. I mean, most men, I mean, I'm Trinidadian, and even in my family, my dad is a survivor of prostate illness, right? And even when it got to that point, I mean, I think it was a little bit taboo. I mean, we were fortunate to be from educated backgrounds, family-wise, but still, it took some doing before we went to the doctor to get the correct care, until it came to a point where it was uncomfortable. It did not need to get to that point, because I am almost sure, right, every single male among us, every single adult male has had some sort of men's health issue and thought that we could stick it out, we could rough it, right? Until it reaches to a point where we say, no, I can't rough this anymore. It might get to a point where I might need more medical care and treatment, and it's only at that point then we decide I need to see the doctor. Not from a preventive care, not where I know that once a year or twice a year, dependent on my age, I need to go and see the doctor for an all-round health check, and not only check my diabetes or blood sugar, cholesterol, etc. Also, we know our family's history, right? We know that maybe my father or my grandfather suffered from prostate illness or some other sexual health illness that is not an STI, right? And we know what we're exposed to. So yeah, I really think that we're in a situation where men need to be more comfortable speaking about their men's health openly, as you said, maybe at the bar, at the rum shop, because at the bar you get a lot of good ideas and good advice, right? Some that you may have to pick and choose, right? But a lot of men are hesitant to go to the doctor for that preventive care and advice.
So Henry raised a very important, and that for me is a very interesting angle, a very interesting take on the issue, where we've always thought of it to some degree as fair apprehension, not wanting to know what you have or what you suffer from and what it means to you and your family. But Henry spoke about acculturation in the way in which we're raising our kids, and me having a little boy as well. That for me strikes directly at, it sort of directly strikes at a very important matter for me in terms of how am I raising my young boy, and and that acculturation. That sort of tough it out approach that you mentioned, Lawrence. I'm going to just speak to you, Henry, to ask you to sort of expound on this a little bit for me from the standpoint of acculturation, and whether or not we've seen that generational shift, or whether there's still a lot of work to be done in the way in what we're saying to each other as men and our young boys.
I picked on it specifically because of the term, and I really and truly do believe that there is so much of our outcomes are driven by what we are taught and what influences us. So as we're talking about it, and the mention of using other social environments to help influence the right outcomes, there was actually a project conducted in the US. I can't remember which city it was, but it was a project conducted in the US to actually help to address the issue of men not doing the basic checks. And what they did was that they educated the barbers, because the barber shop is such a dependable source of information and such a reliable space where men trust each other, that because the barber now was able to do a blood test for sugar, check for cholesterol, check for heart rate, just the basic things that an EMS would be able to do, and then give that gentleman a result, not just of a good haircut, but hey, you need to actually go see a doctor, or your blood sugar is good. Because it's not just bad news that you're going to get, but the opportunity to be in an environment where you have it becomes natural and normal and totally acceptable. So you get your haircut and you get your blood sugar checked at the same time. Perfect scenario. So maybe, Lawrence, you're right, the rum shop, get the shopkeeper equipped with that level of knowledge and that level of understanding, that while you're sitting there relaxing and having that experience, you can also be in an environment where you're at ease. And when you're comfortable, the decision-making process becomes very, very, very easy, because it's not just a decision-making process at that point. There's also then that little bit of group pressure where if everybody in here is doing it, why not me? Right?
Sure.
So if the message is that everybody here is doing it, we don't go to doctors, so then nobody goes to the doctor, then the outcome will always then be problematic. I have a recent very, very unfortunate scenario of a young man. I can't remember exactly how old he is, but I'm from Barbados, and I was home in August, and social media was lit up one day when the news of this very, very well-known young man was circulating, that he was in the hospital and he had cancer, and he died. I think the funeral was maybe 3 weeks ago. The funeral was so big, it was held in a 5,000 seat gymnasium because he was so popular. I'm sure he wasn't 40 years old. I spent a lot of time with him over the years. I actually had reached out to him when I heard that he wasn't well, and his initial response to me was, no, I'm not ready to see anyone yet. But then when I told him, well, I'll be gone in a couple of days, he did tell me to come, and I didn't, and I felt horrible about the fact that I missed the opportunity. But time isn't something that we have, and it can happen very, 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 very quickly. So we as men, we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to encourage men around us. And it's really very important, I think, to share information, because we talk about all types of things, and oftentimes it's good information and oftentimes it's misinformation. But good information is critical because it can help lead someone on the right track. I have Lawrence, who spoke of yours, but mine was my sister, and my sister passed in 2013 after a 7-year battle with cancer. And one of the things I remember about the experience with her was anytime I attempted to share it with somebody, she didn't want to share it. So remarkably, it's not just men,
right.
But even though she was addressing her medical issues, she just wanted to keep it a secret.
Right.
But as we shared it, that's how opportunities for her improved care came,
right.
Because it was through a result of talking. So sharing of information is something that is critical for the growth in any situation. And in order to have men see that there is a way that they can take care of themselves, because part of the thing about a man's socialization, every man in this space right now takes the exact same responsibility. We are responsible for ourselves, and we're either responsible for a child or two, a wife, a woman, a mother, a father, but we have people that we take responsibility for. The only way we can successfully take care of these people is if we are in good health. So we have to take care of ourselves. We really do.
That I mean, you touched on some very critical points, and I think one of them that for me is perhaps most salient, Henry, is the 40-something-year-old, and that's the age you attached to him, so I'm going to go with that, who gets an illness, very popular, knows over 5,000 individuals, who show up at a gymnasium, but yet still dies from cancer, which unknown and probably preventable, like most chronic non-communicable diseases are. And I think this is, for me, where I sort of just want to stick a pin for a second, because as a medical doctor, in my 20+ years of practice, has always been, and unfortunately, I find men at a state of illness where it's already set in the disease, and it can be diabetes, hypertension. We talk about prostate cancer, and we'll delve into that a little bit more, because that is primarily the primary objective in terms of the disease that we want to talk about today. But the reality is that we find men almost at the end stage of a disease, and I think therein lies the challenge, right? You haven't done the checks, and we'll talk about the prostate cancer right now. I think, for example, anyone who's above the age of 40, and there's different schools of thought on it, which tell you 50. I certainly believe that, because for African American males primarily, individuals who, based on the job that you do, right, based on a level of obesity, because we now realize that adipose tissue, fat cells actually predispose you to cancer, right, to different types of cancers. And then, of course, there's also the genetic predisposition. So if you're above the age of 40 or 50 and you haven't had a prostate check, then, that's one of the things that you perhaps want to be getting done, because the reality is the prostate, in fact, people will tell you that a lot of individuals would die from something else before we had drugs that were treating and extending people's life and quality of life for hypertension and diabetes. People would die, and then on an autopsy you see that they had prostate cancer, because if you want to have a cancer, and most oncologists will tell you, prostate cancer is the one to have as a man, because it is not one of those cancers that is ridiculously aggressive, like testicular cancer is, or even colon cancer, or even breast cancer, which is also a thing in men as well. The prostate does not naturally have this very good sort of blood circulation. It's in a nice fibrous capsule located right at the inferior portion, right behind the bladder. And this is why it's ever so often men who have an enlarged prostate, the first sign of that is that they have urinary symptoms. So where the prostate is located, and given just the anatomy of the prostate, very often if you do a regular PSA, and most men are actually, I started earlier in my career, I remember somewhere 2006, I started a men's wellness clinic. And because I felt that men just weren't coming to see me, so I'd go to them. I would literally get a tent next to a bar or a rum shop. Right? And I remember men coming in to get the prostate check done, and I would go through the whole process and explaining to them, where the prostate is located, why that is important. And at the point of doing a digital rectal examination, which is a very important but very simple process to do, there are many men who would, that's the point, they would just pull up their drawers and pants and say, you're not doing this to me, right? Because there's that phobia, there's that stigma, there's so many social and cultural concerns around that. But we have other important tests, and some of them are not available here, but a PSA, for example, and I'm not saying that the PSA replaces that exam, because you may very well do a PSA that is normal, but if you check the prostate, just the consistency of the prostate, for example, which I always tell people, it has the consistency of the tip of your nose. If something feels a little harder than that and the surface of it is not smooth, suddenly you start feeling a nodule or two on that prostate and it feels firm, whether or not you have sort of urinary symptoms present, that is something that you want to have checked, right? And if you check it in time, the survival rate, the 5-year survival rate of someone with a PSA that is elevated is 100%. And 100%.
I would think that if men considered that the negative outcome of not having their prostate checked is to lose their sexual prowess,
yeah,
I think you'd accept that, right? As a trade-off, I would.
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised that I have men who differ vehemently about this and say, doctor, if I lose my ability to perform sexually, I might as well be dead. Because and again, that goes back to the book that I just spoke about, and I did not bring this book just to humor you on the sense of the end of men and the rise of women. So much of that male, the archetypal male, that patriarch value in the male is tied to those things, sexual prowess, because the reality is what once the male protector, provider, we have women who are fully independent now. They don't need protection. We live in a safer society. There's no saber-toothed tiger trying to take you out, right? There's no hunter-gatherer society, and you're perhaps not the only provider or the principal provider in the home. Suddenly, there's an erosion of that masculine value. So for the man, so much of what he is as a man is tied to his ability to perform sexually and perform well sexually. So many men, when you have that discussion with them, is the reason why men don't take the drugs for hypertension. If you place a lot of men on beta blockers, for example, because it lowers the rate at which the cardiac output, how much the blood is leaving the heart, it can cause erectile dysfunction. So there are many men who will tell you, I will take my heart attack, but I will not lose my erection. So those are some, but the reality is that it doesn't have to be an either or. We can have discussions around those things. But if you don't come into the office because you're afraid that this man is going to give me a medication because he's thinking hypertension and I'm thinking sex, and we don't see eye to eye, as a male, I mean, perhaps you could see that 20 years ago I perhaps thought differently about that, but at my age right now, I am now faced with the very same things that that many of my patients are concerned about. So I have to go into the room with the patient thinking about, as a male, if I were in those shoes, what would I want? What that discussion needs to look like. But I want to just go ahead.
I would say as well, Dr. Pierre, is some men also think that I have a really good, healthy, sporty lifestyle. I'm not exposed to that. And that's completely untrue, right? This could happen to any man, dependent on your lifestyle, whether you're a smoker and a drinker, whether you're a sports fanatic, a gym fanatic, you're eating clean. Prostate affects you. Prostate issues do affect you. And as Dr. Pierre said, it's important to get it checked, because you may not get the symptoms. That does not mean that something's not developing inside you, right? That something untoward is happening inside you that could have a result, and all it takes is one life-changing move, one life-changing jerk, right, to activate those symptoms. And then you go and get it checked, and then it might be, well, it won't be too late, but it could have been treated well before.
The other thing as well, to Lawrence, which is important, is that, you know, it's not just, and you know, I no longer divide diseases in men and women. I don't, because I call it, because the impact of it, while one person may suffer the disease, everyone else bears the cost. Because and that's referred to as the burden of disease, right? If you have a disease and you suddenly have to now budget for medication or for care, you're perhaps dipping into a child's education fund, right? You're perhaps that renovation or that home you're trying to build or renovate, and so on, it now sets behind. You're now making a whole set of plans. So for me, disease today, especially chronic non-communicable disease, is everyone bears the cost. So I don't divide those things up anymore, right? So there's also the fact about getting early sort of preventive approach to care to diseases also lessens the burden of the disease, because it's much easier to get on that from very early, do a biopsy, find out that you have prostate cancer, you're at perhaps a stage 2, and that can actually be treated and allow you to not only continue your life, but a productive life, right? So I know the two of you personally, and I know your approach to health, and you spoke of acculturation, which I want to go back to that, because the challenge I have with this is, I'm looking at the audience right now, and we have different demographics here, but the approach has not changed. So we have the Caribbean. Unfortunately, there are a number of single parent homes run by women who have a completely different approach to care, yet still they're raising men who, for some reason or the other, still maintain those attitudes. So where are we falling short? Where's that gap?
Can I just put a plug in there, not to cut you short on your what you're ending up with, right, in this, but I remember as a youth when cervical cancer became a thing, and there was this big push, at least in Trinidad. I can't speak for the rest of the Caribbean at the time. There was a big push for women to get their stuff checked. You know, get your pap smears done on a regular, and get your breast checked, and that is now commonplace. Women know, I have to do this once a year, right? Regardless, I shouldn't say regardless of your age. Once you become of the age of sexual maturity, you do your pap smears, you do your breast checks, and women do it, right? Recently, I went to Trinidad for my wife to go and look after all her ladies' checks, right? And what's surprising now is that there's a hospital in Trinidad dedicated for maternal care, for ladies' care. And whilst I was there, I mean, I waited for her while she was doing her stuff at doctor, and it was amazing to see how many women are coming in, one after the next, right? Every day I was there for about three days, because 3 different tests, was three days long. But I am certain, should it be the opposite way around, we wouldn't see that number of men trickling in, right?
And the question is, why is that?
But
right?
I think Lawrence kind of touched on it, right, because you've had a focus on changing behavior, and everyone knows that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. There are breast cancer walks in every Caribbean island. The way they're conducted, they've gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. As you all know, I am a massive NFL fan. Go Patriots. And the NFL celebrates 2 individual seasons inside of its season of football. In October, they focus attention on breast cancer awareness. So all the men, they wear pink shoes, pink accoutrements, just to highlight pink, because pink is the breast cancer color. And then for November they commemorate the warriors, the army and the
veterans
and all the veterans. But ask anyone, what is the prostate cancer color? Most people don't know it's purple.
Right. So we'll stick a pin here. I want to come back to that because you've certainly highlighted that men are not as organized as women are, but we have to pay some bills, so we'll just go across for a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back after the show. We're talking men's health. Talk to me, bro.
It's only just a phase. Once we're vaccinated, and everybody gon' be safe. Everybody gon' be safe. One kind, one people. We are roll up to roll up. Cause no man's alone. Do what's right. Cause I love you. Brother, my sister. And we're in this together. My sister, my brother. I don't wanna lose you. I love you too much. I think it's better for us, yeah. It's better for us, yeah. I don't wanna lose you. I love you too much, yeah. It's better for us. Tell your mommy to roll out.
Bless up. Dejo here, and I'm doing my part in the fight against COVID-19 by following all safety protocols and, most importantly, rolling up my sleeve for the vaccine. So I'm encouraging you to do the same, because that's our best shot of protecting ourselves, our family, and our friends. So don't wait, vaccinate. Let's roll up to roll out.
Welcome back. This is HealthWise, and we are having a rather important but also very interesting discussion about men's health. The topic is Talk to Me, Bro. And talk to me, bro, yes, but certainly we are asking women to be part of that discussion as well, because the bro might be your brother, might be an uncle, might be a spouse. Certainly what we have honed in on thus far is that there certainly needs to be not just more discussion, not just more talking to, but speaking with, making it very interactive and conversational to find out what the reasons are. And before we went to the break, Henry was just alluding to the fact that, he being a big NFL fan himself, has been very cognizant of the fact that breast cancer seems to be well celebrated, well marketed. Most of us men, we actually join those walks ourselves, but yet still there doesn't seem to be that type of movement around men's health, and not because it is less important. Prostate cancer, 1 in every 8 males will be diagnosed with prostate cancer, but that's in the US. In the Caribbean, it's 18 to 40% higher in terms of the rate of individuals who will not only have but die from prostate cancer simply because they did not get access to care in a timely enough manner. So just double those figures, it will tell you the risk that there is to us men either becoming ill or possibly losing our lives in an untimely way to prostate cancer. So back to you, Henry. I'm just going to pitch back to you because, as I said, evidently there is something about the fact that while we can mobilize for all the other social activities, there doesn't seem to be that type of mobilization around health issues for men. And and the question is, where do we start?
Well, I mentioned earlier the barbershop example, but it just needs to simplify. I'm pretty sure that we recognize as on a national level the importance of good health. Now, I think part of the reason why the female care component of it would have come to the fore would have just been by virtue of the occurrences. Now, I'd have to say that if there is a greater awareness of that, then the media machinery and the publicizing of the need for men to be ensuring that they are taking care of these little details, it can be improved. It is very much a simple step-by-step process. The workplace is, I think, also an excellent place where within my setting, a food handler's certificate a food handler's permit is necessary. Now, a food handler's permit should occur with any business that is involved in the serving or supply of food. So even though we are a distribution company, that will then say that all other distribution companies of food, all of the staff who are exposed, so that's everyone in the warehouse. Actually, it's everyone in the organization. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're on the compound, it's everyone in the organization. So everyone in the office, they also need to get. There's no reason why that food handler's permit, just like how we've brought in a medical doctor to execute for that, couldn't then be taking time so the business can take some responsibility as well to say, okay, well, women over here for these reasons, men over here for these reasons, and check on these things, because and not to monetize anything, but productivity has a cost. And when men aren't, when you have an organization and they're made up of women and women are sick, then you're missing critical resources. And when you have an organization and men are sick, you're missing critical resources. So productivity then goes down as a result of health. So it's in the business's best interest as well to ensure that its staffing is properly taken care of and properly being seen after. So I would actually even encourage that as a step as well.
Yeah.
I would throw in there to say that as leaders in the community and in our workspaces, it's important for us to have health surveillance programs, and not only for blood sugar and cholesterol, but just have just same way we have annual breast cancer awareness programs and come and get your breast checked, and leave it completely voluntary, right? You have a similar thing for men, right? Not focusing on prostate alone, right? Because maybe you would want to have like 1/10 as part of a health fair, with all the different things that men are susceptible to outside of the regular lifestyle diseases, and so that you sort of ease off the taboo bit of being pinpointed or you're going to get your prostate checked today. You leave it open-ended so you can have a visual of what it looks like on posters and multimedia, and how it affects you, right? I mean, we see things on television, on YouTube, social media, how breast cancer affects males and females, how lung cancer affects persons, but hardly ever do we see anything on prostate cancer and how it really affects you. We even see things on hemorrhoids. You know, when you go to the cinema, there's the ever so popular thing where you can't sit for very, very long, right? With the preparation aid ads, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing for prostate cancer or prostate illness.
Well, Lawrence, I mean, in all fairness, during the break, you asked a question, which is, where does a man go to get his prostate checked? And I think that question, being a genuine question from you, also highlights something else, which is access. Right, I think that there is a problem in terms of accessing that type of care. If you look at the trend right now in the U.S., a lot of companies are now making telehealth services available to people right in the workplace, because the reality is, if a man has to take 4 to 6 hours from his workday to go sit in a doctor's office, wait for that doctor to come at whatever time, for that man as well, that, you talk about the economic cost, for him, that's the economic cost he's looking at. Because I see it where a man works here, but he has 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And for him, there's that opportunity cost of taking time from his work or asking time from a gig economy where, for example, he's paid by hour, and that 4 or 6 hours is money, revenue lost for him. So I think we have to also think of in terms of how do we make that accessible. But another thing as well is that how do men now participate in their health, right? Women come to you armed with information. Women request certain things of their doctors. And we have a situation where we have a predominance of female doctors over men, and then there are female doctors, colleagues of men, who will tell you that they're a little hesitant to say to a man that I need to do a digital prostate exam on you because of just the stigma and the taboo around those things. So if men become more involved, and you're over the age of 40 and you're going to see a doctor and you're asking for a routine check, you can begin to ask and advocate for certain things yourself. But I certainly think as leaders, we have a responsibility to now look at our schedules and see how we accommodate, those type of visits, those regular screens that our direct reports and ourselves need. Because, as I say to patients all the time, if you're too busy to stop and get your routine check, it's like driving your car around and saying, I don't have time to stop and get gas. Right? Sure. Everyone makes time to go to the gas station, no matter how long, because when that needle is on E, if you don't stop, you can't go anywhere. So however long the line is, you'll stop and you'll get gas. So, I think that's something that we have to start talking about in terms of access, because I think the access is also a problem as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Prevention.
Yeah.
How do we prevent or minimize the occurrence of this? We talk about the incidences being higher in the Caribbean than they are in North America. Yeah. But part of it also has to be from a solution standpoint. So what education is there that you can say, okay, well, maybe eat more blueberries, maybe drink more cranberry juice. Yeah. Well, are these things actually then solutions to help with the problem?
Certainly. I mean, there are a number of practices in the Caribbean. I mean, the African American male, for more reasons than one, is predisposed to prostatic issues. But if you look at a PSA, a lot of times a PSA is elevated and may not necessarily mean that there's cancer. It just means that there's an inflammation of the prostate, prostatitis. But anybody if you know the process of inflammation, every time that tissue repairs itself, there's a very good chance that some rogue cells will, especially if there's already a genetic predisposition, that cancer will actually evolve from that repeated inflammation. A lot of times I see a PSA below 12 or 13, and I just treat it with a course of antibiotics, and then follow up and see exactly where that individual is going. But there's also other things that we do: our lifestyle, alcoholism, right? Smoking, right? Our diets are also, very rich in red meat, very rich in unhealthy fats, and so on. So all those things in our themselves predispose us to some of those diseases, and that becomes a very ticklish thing to talk about, because then people see the cost of eating properly.
But alcohol consumption is part of our social makeup. There must be some form of alcohol that we can consume that would not be as impactful as others.
You're putting me in a very tight spot, and I know exactly why he's doing that. You shouldn't bring your friends to talk about health stuff. I say healthy alcohol consumption. It'd be hypocritical of me to.
Acceptable forms of alcohol.
Well, then acceptable becomes very very relative, right? I mean, I'll tell you what we have used as acceptable levels of corruption simply because we don't do breathalyzer tests. There are many individuals when you see them I can sit at Zanzibar one evening and see that person. There's no reason that person should get behind a wheel afterwards. In the U.S., that person would be legally drunk, whether you're staggering or not. So it's a very difficult thing to speak of alcohol consumptions or healthy or safe levels in a society where it is such an important part of our social dynamic or social interaction. In fact, many individuals will say alcohol is that lubrication for social intercourse. That's what if men don't drink, they cannot talk. And that's the reality. I as one male growing up in the Caribbean for a while, I can tell you that there were times when I decided I'm going on a cleanse, and I had to stay home at that time because I'd go home and I'd go out and say to my friends, I'll have a bottle of water. And my friends would say to me, I'm not buying any water. If you're not having a drink, buy your water yourself. So those are the, and I see all the nods in the audience because I know you agree with me that we are very encouraging, but for all the wrong things. So when you said earlier, the bar and the ram shop is a place to get good advice, but it's good advice for all the wrong things. Ever so often, unfortunately. But it's a place where there's tremendous influence. Imagine if that influence was used as a force of good. Yeah. On Saturday, we had a meeting with, forming an NCD alliance here in St. Kitts, which is actually a great initiative. But the biggest struggle we have, and I'm going to just pitch to you, Mr. Koskab, is the backlash from the business community. Because for them, they may see this, anything that seems to curb a particular behavior that makes money is hitting them right in the pocket. And that is a challenge that I think we as physicians and individuals like ourselves are forming an NCD alliance, because we recognize unless we come together around some issues and push for legislative change, we won't get anything done. But we are deathly afraid of the Chamber of Commerce because we feel that you're a very powerful group and we don't know how to engage you in a way that says there's a way to make money but still have a society that's healthy and productive.
So let me address that, because I think there's oftentimes a real misrepresentation of the objectives of business. It's not primarily to make fast money, but it's about building a structure that is long-lasting. If you don't have a healthy workforce, if you don't have an able-bodied workforce that over time is able to carry that business that's today 100 years, 200 years. I work for an organization that was founded in 1886. The reason why it still exists is because Coca-Cola has continued to invest in the development of the environment that it lives in. The mindset of business is continuing to change, and the messaging to the Chamber of Commerce has to be partnership, because that's the only way that we're going to have the outcomes that we want. Because I said it before and I'll say it again, a healthy workforce, because when anyone is ill, it puts a strain on all of the other resources in the organization. So downtime, and you just mentioned it as well, the individual who's earning is at risk of not earning, but the organization is also then becoming burdened. Because if we use the experience that we're all now coming out of over the last couple of years, whenever someone in the organization got sick, it meant that someone else had to work longer hours. And then what did that do? That was then tearing down other people. So the entire process just has to be, where do you align the pillars to hold this structure up and then keep it strong? The Coliseum is how many years old? And it's still standing because it was built on a firm foundation. So it just needs to be partnership. It just needs to be aligning similar needs and ensuring that all of the messages are driving towards the same outcome. And I'm going to take this opportunity to say, an organization is not the building, it's the people. A business, a company, an organization of any kind, they cannot function without people. So the people need to be healthy, they need to be strong, they need to be mentally healthy, they need to be physically healthy in order to have these good outcomes.
I certainly appreciate that, because and I also add to that as well, besides those individuals within your organization as well, to even the market you're selling to. If people are choosing between, buying your product and then, buying medication for an illness that they need to sort of control or manage, then that's also eating into your bottom line as well. So having a healthy society, how that propagates beyond just your organization, is also extremely important for business.
So, in my past life, I had the opportunity to work to live and work in the UK, and I worked for the NHS. And I remember about 15 years ago was when they started healthy eating campaign, right? And they would do it directly in workplaces, on the streets, signage on the side of the streets. A packet of crisps or a packet of chips has this amount of oil, and it's shortening your life by this amount of hours. You walk into buildings and you would see, have you eaten your 7 fruits and vegetables for the day? Or restaurants as well, they push healthier foods, homegrown stuff. So I think diet as well has a huge role to play in that preventive mechanism. Circling back to alcohol consumption, no one's saying don't drink alcohol, but do it responsibly. And when we go on the strip and we lime in, or we partying or whatever, it's important to do it responsibly. Men are more susceptible, right, according to studies and surveys, to these sort of lifestyle diseases, because we tend to drink more, we tend to smoke more than females. That's what the surveys show. All right. So, and then when we go out on the strip and we have a heavy night, we have a not so healthy meal. The next morning, you're a little bit worse for wear. You have a greasy meal to make you feel better. All right. These are all the things that continue to contribute towards a declining declining healthy male population, and we need to start putting things in place to prevent it, all of which we've discussed and continue to
and I think what you speak to is just that entire cascade of events, because and you're absolutely correct, and I think the statistics are correct, and we don't have to go too far for it. We can just go on the strip at any given night, and you will just look at the ratio of men to women. You look at the ratio of drinks that men have to women, but a lot of this are also sometimes indicative of something else. What is compelling the drinking or the smoking? What exactly are the mental health situations that are actually provoking that? That's one of them. The other thing as well too, you can also just take a walk to JNF Hospital right now, and if you go to the hospital and you're entering the medical ward, the male side is on the right of it, and the female side is on the left. If you go on over to JNF on the male side of the ward right now, the entire male side is full, and then half of the female side is also men, because there just isn't enough space on the male side to accommodate. Because not only do they get sick quicker, they get very sick when they come in, and the hospital stays also longer for men. So there are so many things contributing to that, and a lot of times when you look at those things and you look at the diseases, and a lot of them are preventable by far and large. I'm not saying that you will never have hypertension or diabetes, but there are things that we can do today, right, to actually at least curtail the onset of those diseases. If you look at prostate cancer, and I just want to circle back to this again, as I said, a PSA test if you don't want to get a digital exam, if you haven't gotten around to that. And I think it's important to have a conversation around that. This speaks, for those of you who may feel that this is an indication of your sexuality. It's actually not. And I have had men who I examine, and by examining their prostate, they get an erection because the prostate is an erogenous zone. In fact, the prostate massage is recommended to men who have erectile dysfunction. So the idea that if you're having a digital rectal examination and you have an erection, that indicates something else. I think education can help curb those things, and this is why it's so important for you to have a doctor that you're comfortable having that discussion. I know oftentimes, unfortunately, most men end up seeing a doctor for the first time in the little cubicles at JNF Hospital, where there's somebody right next to you, where it's just not the place to have that discussion. And an ER doctor is not the person, just because of the pace at which the momentum that in an emergency room setting, that is just not the place to have that discussion. But since that's the only contact a lot of men have had with a doctor in the last couple of years, because they've gotten very sick and something has compelled them or someone took them there. I look in the audience and I see women, because the other thing as well too is that when men are faced with those things, there are a number of things that hits home for you immediately. One, the loss of the finance to the family, loss of family support. But two, how you will be viewed, because a lot of times prostate cancer does not start with this, that you just start peeing blood or whatever the case may be. It may very well be that you have what is referred to as benign prostatic hypertrophy, where the prostate gets big and suddenly your pee that was falling over there is now falling on what is right next to you on your feet, and those are signs that the prostate is being enlarged. You have to wait a little longer than before for the pee to eventually come out, and sometimes the urine stream is not as strong. And those are all things that indicate sometimes that the prostate is becoming a bit enlarged and needs to be looked after, right? But a lot of individuals actually cannot have that discussion with their spouse, because they feel it hits immediately at the fact that I can no longer be a man to you. And the question is, how do you define male, and how are women helping us as men define who we are as men, recognizing that there are diseases that we will have throughout the course of our life that will change the dynamic of our relationship.
So, as mentioned earlier, women from as early as they are developing, it becomes a norm to look at your female reproductive care, and that's so there's a doctor specifically for that, and you have those visits a couple of times a year, and you get your pap smears and you get your cervix checks, but a man doesn't have any such similar.
Sure. So as yet.
So maybe we need to start to have.
Well, what I would say, I mean, as a youth growing up, I mean, I was a little bit of a free spirit, right? And I used to get into a lot of accidents. I would be in the hospital quite often. But one of the and my mother.
No surprise there.
One of the things my mother, as a midwife, always coached me, right? She's not gonna go into the room with me with the doctor. She always said, be open with the doctor. It's private, it's confidential, and listen to what the doctor says and follow his instructions. Don't just go because you're going to see a doctor. Listen to what the doctor says and follow the instructions. If you don't know, if you can't remember, write it down.
And that's so important, Lawrence, because oftentimes, and it's twofold, because in many situations you're actually advised to have someone with you, because listening can become that you're focusing on one thing and you're missing all of the other things. But it's also very important that men are able to listen and to accept the information, understand the information, and then follow the guidance. Because my experiences as a boy, I had some challenges with my nose. I had the worst sinuses ever, and I had these monthly doctor visits. And I'm going to secondary school, and I am going to the doctor once every month, and I'm going to the doctor on my own because it was a set time and it was a set thing. And I developed this going to the doctor and talking to the doctor, which is why I have doctors as friends, because they're not superhuman. They're regular people, not all totally regular.
We're not.
But at the end of the day, it is not a place that is out of reach. It is not a place. Going to a doctor is not a place where you should be scared. You're not going into a cave to find a boogeyman. The information that you'll get will be to help you and to improve any situation and to maintain your well-being. So the idea as well of what a doctor represents for some men oftentimes is, that's a source of bad news, so I'm not going.
So true. But we want to stick a pin here. Otherwise, our sponsors will start dropping us, and we don't want that to happen. So we'll take our break, and when we get back, I think we should hear from our audience, because we have men sitting here. I can see some burning questions. My brother over there looking straight at me. I can see some questions staring right through the brain, and I think it's important for us to hear from them. What are some of the questions? What are some of the things that we haven't said that we should be talking about? And perhaps from you as to what your own experience has been in terms of your approach to care, and hopefully that information is going to be pretty instructive to the rest of us here listening. Thank you, and we'll be back in a minute.
It's only just a phase. Once we're vaccinated, and everybody gon' be safe. Everybody gon' be safe. One kind, yeah. One people. We are roll up to roll up, yeah. 'Cause no man's alone. Do what's right, alright. 'Cause I love you, brother, my sister. And we're in this together, my sister, my brother. I don't wanna lose you. I love you too much. I think it's better for us, yeah, yeah. It's better for us, yeah. I don't wanna lose you. I love you too much, yeah, yeah. It's better for us. Tell your mommy to let it roll out.
Bless up, Dejo here, and I'm doing my part in the fight against COVID-19 by following all safety protocols and, most importantly, rolling up my sleeve for the vaccine. So I'm encouraging you to do the same, because that's our best shot of protecting ourselves, our family, and our friends. So don't wait, vaccinate. Let's roll up to roll out.
Welcome back. Talk to Me Bro. It's the show we're having this afternoon or this evening. And I have two important guests, friends of mine, Henry Yearwood and Lawrence Budasing, and we're just getting to the meat of things, folks. And we've spoken about, the approach to men's health, some of the challenges that I think men have in terms of accessing care, fear being a factor, acculturation being another. Lawrence spoke earlier, and it was not lost on me when you said that we feel like we're okay. And I tell patients all the time that health is not the absence of symptoms, because there may very well be something else happening. So we've looked at some of the reasons why people, men, typically don't access care. And we've also looked at some of the recommendations, how we change the conversation, how we use those sort of social spaces as a force for good, as a force to actually influence positively our peers, and how we can actually encourage others, how everyone can become involved. We also spoke of the burden of disease, how society bears that tab, that when somebody gets sick, everyone pays in some form or fashion, right, to provide care for that individual, or either to replace that individual who has lost, and what that does to productivity in an organization. So ultimately, I think because there are so many different facets that are impacted, it is obvious that there has to be an all-of-society approach. Yeah. I think there's some important points that you made, Henry, in terms of just the sheer lack of organization that men have in terms of how we approach diseases. You see men, and you see breast cancer has become almost a brand, if you will, right? It's fashionable to wear pink in October. I remember Nicole, who's not here, but Nicole came, and I think her first week at work, she wore a pink wig, and she had no difficulty doing that because she was promoting breast cancer. Breast cancer walks is also well attended, and I don't know that any man in here knows what the color for prostate cancer is. And that shows that there's just a lack of awareness. And I think if we are waiting for women to be the one to drive that for us, then I think we're in a bad place. So it means that as men, we sort of need to come together, and we sort of congregate around these issues. We play an important role in our families, in our society, in the workplaces. Though that's not a more important role, but an important role, an equally important role. And certainly when you look at just the disparity that exists in terms of how diseases affect the male to female gender, certainly I think that is compelling enough for us to sit and have a look inwardly first, in terms of our own approaches, and then within our own homes and our own families, and what are we saying to each other in terms of how healthcare should be approached. Not when you start feeling sick, not when something seems to be wrong, not because your good friend died from cancer. And that's what happens a lot of times. I see men descend on my office sometimes, and it's because a friend of mine just died from cancer, and therefore if I knew this guy so well, let me see if I have cancer, and then I do a PSA. It's normal. You don't see them again. Ever. Until perhaps another friend dies, right? So fear should not be what drives that. And you spoke of fear, which is such an important thing, because what you may be afraid of is actually does not really exist, right? I remember a gentleman a few weeks ago who came to me and had his blood pressure very elevated, and was just a routine check, just a routine conversation, very elevated. I mean, dangerously elevated, that if you just scared that guy, there's a very good chance that he might have had a stroke. And then, in seeing him, I said, let's get some blood work done. Well, it took 2 months to get him to do the blood work. And then when I got him to do the blood work, it took another 3 months to get him to come and get the results for the blood work. And I kept chasing this guy down all over the place. And eventually, when he came and I asked, why didn't you come? He said, boy, doc, honestly, I just didn't want to know the results, because when I see my pressure so high, I just imagine something has to be very wrong with me, and I have my son to care for, who loves me so much and who I love. And I'm saying, but if you love your son that much, all the more reason why you want to be sure that you want to be around for a very long time. You don't want to just I said and I say to patients, I said, if you die, that's not the worst thing. And people think I'm very brutal to say that. I say, no, if you die, that's not the worst thing. It's to live with that kind of disability that you could have avoided. Somebody who has a stroke and your entire left or right side is hemiplegic, no power, nothing at all. If you're a bus driver, you can't drive. If you're a contractor, a construction worker, suddenly you cannot earn, and you're just around, and now you become a burden to your family and to society. So that is the reality. That's what happens when we don't nip things in the bud, and we don't go out there and ensure that whatever disease that we're predisposed to, that we actually prevent it. Or if we have a disease, we actually get on board and prevent its complication. But we've spoken a lot. We have a nice little audience here. It so happened that when I said that we were going to have some questions, it seemed the audience started thinning out. I don't know, the dean who's with us moved to the back, and everyone seems to be a bit apprehensive. But I really think, listen, this is televised, yes, but understand that whatever we say here today is going to be of tremendous value to the rest of the St. Kitts and Nevis society. I want to hear from the women, I want to hear from the men, I want to hear from the women why they can't compel their men, and women are very influential, but cannot get that man in front of a doctor. I want to get an understanding of what we need to be doing. So, my friend in the back, I want to start with you.
Good afternoon. So, this is a very interesting topic on the prostate wellness. Little history, I have something I'm aware of because my granddad, in his latter years, he died at 92. But for about 3 or 4 years before he died, he had an enlarged prostate.
Right.
To the point that he had to have a catheter.
Right.
Fortunately or unfortunately, for that period of time, I just got my license, and as one of the youngest grandsons, had to be the person taking him to change the catheter from time to time. Strange enough, at that time, not much education. I was just told, hey, Pops had an enlarged prostate. I had no idea what that meant. All I knew is he couldn't urinate on his own. But, as time went on and I read, I started understanding what it was all about. The truth is, sometimes if you're exposed to these things and you understand the discomfort and pain as a man that one would have to go through to have a catheter inserted maybe once every month or changed over a period of time. And at one time I was present, I had to ask the doctor to stop, give him a break, because this seems too painful. Now, men, just picture a tube going up your penis, and that's just the reality. It can't be an easy thing. So, not that we should have these examples as the reasons that prompt us to look after ourselves, but they are the realities when you start saying you become a burden and you become, I guess, less confident as a man if you have to have that done at an early age. My granddad was in his 80s, late 80s, going into his 90s when that took place. I've also had the unfortunate experience of my mother being diagnosed with breast cancer and seeing how quickly things happen. So for me, the conversation is a real one, and truth of the matter is these are real things. And I don't know if it's cultural or lack thereof, or we need to say more. But as men, you just need to take care of yourself. Whether somebody say it or don't want to do it, it comes down to you.
Yeah.
And what you want for yourself. But I have a question based on something I saw on Instagram recently. It was a female doctor who was saying that overusing the machine causes some enlargement of the prostate, meaning you're having sex too often,
right,
you're ejaculating too often. How does that in some way impact the enlargement of the prostate? Is this accurate? Is this correct information or misinformation?
Yeah. No, there's some truth to it. I mean, if you look at the anatomy of the prostate and with the prostate, first of all, the prostate is located in the top third part of the urethra, that tube where urine passes out. And the prostate is by far and large a muscle, so there's a muscular portion of it that allows. The prostate has several functions, but one is actually controlling the flow of urine and also semen from the passing of the urethra. So like any muscle that is hypertrophied, if I work out my muscle a lot, you're going to see some hypertrophy, which means that there's an increase in size in that muscle. So yes, the question always is, what does that overuse look like? In fact, I mean that data, I have to, there's a lot of data out there, but there are different schools of thought on what overuse. On the contrary, however, there's also data that shows that frequent masturbation, for example, though it may cause hypertrophy, it reduces the risk of cancer. There are different schools of thought on that, but ultimately, there is no direct correlation per se, hard and fast evidence that suggests that X number of times of ejaculation or sex leads to X amount of hypertrophy. But there is some enlarging of the gland over time, simply because of its anatomical structure. And any use of any muscle, first you have an increase in the volume of each muscular fiber, and then you have an increase in the number of cells, which is hypoplasia, and may not necessarily lead to the point where you have that sort of urinary retention that you mentioned that your grandfather had, or even predispose you to prostate cancer in any way. Dean Callanan.
Thanks, guys. I haven't left the room yet. So again, thanks for this important conversation. And just a couple of things. So, I've lived in many different countries, and I think the issues are the same. So, for instance, in one country I lived in, my wife gets a letter every year. It's not even just announced on television. She gets a letter that say you need your pap smear and you need your breasts examined. There is zero for the men. I think once I got something in the post to check my stool for blood for colon cancer. But I think the PR exercise around the prostate is really poor. A lot of people don't even know where it is, because if it's inside somewhere, we know where the breasts are, and we know where the vagina is, but ask us where the prostate is. A lot of people do not have a clue where it is. It's somewhere inside, so we'll not bother about it. And the other thing about it is that the manual procedure for testing it is relatively simple. I mean, I have it at my age now, frequently tested. And I know you did mention about hanging around for 4 hours in a surgery to get this done. I really hope no one has to do that, because even on this island, there's many surgeries who can treat you within a matter of 15 to 20 minutes. And so no one should be making people hang around for long periods of time for male or female evaluations. So I'm hoping that that's the case. It's quick, it's rapid.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not invasive. I mean, I faint when someone takes blood from me. This is not an invasive procedure. So,
certainly.
you know, I would encourage that we have to do more. And the other thing is, I never see posters about prostate. I see tons of posters about everything else, but I never see a poster in a doctor's surgery about the prostate, and I think that should be there as well.
Certainly, thank you. I mean, those are very, very valid points, and you know, I mean, again, just the idea that a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare practitioner takes it upon themselves to actually notify you when those things are due is that, for me. I mean, we market to all the things to sell all other commodities to individuals, and we remind them when, you know, I have an air purifier and I get an alert from Amazon every 3 months that I need new I need to change the filters on it, right? You know, things that are far less important. So I certainly think that that's the way in which I think we need to be also, you know, be more involved in terms of how, you know, patients, because there's so many things competing for your attention today, right? Through, you know, it's not that you don't want to get it done, but of all the 10 other things which are equally important, getting a check for a disease that may or may not exist is something that I think is lost on people. So that's a very good idea. And the second thing, of course, is, you know, I mean, I don't know what the experience is, but I do know that individuals, I mean, I've been to the doctor here, and I've had to wait a ridiculous amount of time, even as a medical doctor, going to a colleague of mine who I know personally, because there's always one reason or the other. Well, a surgery or something is up. So everyone's experiences is different, but certainly I think that we have to do better in terms of that. But also I think there are campaigns. So the Rotary Club does a lot of work in terms of prostate cancer checks. I went to TDC the other day. I was very surprised to see that when I went upstairs, there were prostate checks being done right at TDC as well. So I think those are the things that we have to look for, those campaigns. We may have to look at doing some at our organizations as well, the same way that you do your food handlers permanent heading, you know, whether or not that is something, especially those who have a predominantly male workforce. I think that's important. So we have to sometimes bring, you know, if Mohammed won't go to the mountain, the mountain has to Mohammed, or is it the reverse? Lawrence.
I would say as well, likewise, Dean Callanan, I've had the opportunity of living and working in other countries, and just from the messaging, the multimedia, the posters. In October we have Breast Cancer Awareness Month. In November it's known as Movember, right, where the men shave clean, right, and you grow a mustache, right, in recognition of and in support of, and you use it as a fun activity among colleagues, among friends, and you also use it as a fundraiser to raise funds into prostate cancer awareness foundations,
Right.
to support those that are vulnerable and those that are suffering.
But I haven't seen any of that here on Island. And
we have an
unfortunately-
opportunity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to tap, and I think we, as leaders, need to take that opportunity. I mean, it's a bit late on in the month now, but definitely we could start proceedings from this moment onwards,
yeah.
to put things in place. We have enough time to get a Movember campaign going 2024, 2023,
2023.
sorry.
Natalia is here.
Hi.
so.
First of all, thank you very much for the talk.
Absolutely.
Second of all, I just wanted to make perhaps a comment or a question.
Sure.
On my last job, working as a nurse in a preparation for surgery clinic, one thing I understood, and even talking to my colleagues, they mentioned the same, is that there was a lot of men that didn't take responsibility for their own health, as in they wouldn't know what medication they were taking and why they were taking it or when they were taking it. So in a lot of situations, they had to have their wife explaining why things happened. Again, I don't know if it's cultural or not, but it goes back to what you said about taking responsibility for your own health.
Yeah, certainly. No, certainly that's a very valid point. In fact, and you know the challenges, and it happens to anyone, not just men, right? I mean, if you're going to the doctor and there's a particular disease that you're being told, the number of questions coming to you at the same time, it makes it almost impossible to hear anything else that's being said, because that disease for you means a number of things. It means what that outcome, what happens to your life afterwards, what decisions you need to make. Do you have a will in place? Do you have a safety net? There's so many things that comes to mind that it becomes impossible to process any other information. And so having that sort of family sort of dynamic where your wife accompanies you, your girlfriend, your significant other accompanies you to those discussions is particularly important, because there's a lot, and there are doctors. I try my best to break things down in terminology that people understand. Right, but I always go back to the scenario where I tell people every day that there's this patient I say to that you're diabetic, and I want you to have this for your meals and whatever and so on, and break down your meals into smaller meals. And I felt I had done a very good job in explaining diabetes and why her meals need to be spaced the way it was and broken down in terms of meal sizes. And she left the office and said, yes, doctor, everything and so on. And then the receptionist calls me back and says, well, she wants to see me. And she comes back into the office, and the next question is, the meals, the diet you spoke about, is it before or after meals? Because she had seen this completely separate to what her normal meals are, right? So a lot of times we think that people understand, and there's this reverence that's paid to doctors, I don't know why, that people are afraid to ask doctors and to challenge doctors and to make sure that you spend time and you explain this in a way that I understand it, so that I can go back and act on what you said.
Because, and it was exactly where my thoughts were going. You're speaking to the experience from the practitioner standpoint. As a patient, if you aren't able to navigate the doctor, you can be confused. The doctor, and you may be an exception, but the doctor needs to offer a level of empathy, actually basic customer service, to communicate in such a way that makes the person comfortable. Because you as the doctor, even though you are credible, you are still battling with all of the other voices that person has heard before. So you are trying to overcome a moment, and you are sharing all of the correct information at that time. But the reality of it is that person has heard something else from somebody else who's had a similar experience and have been and probably misinterpreted what they were told, have shared wrong information. We know how it works. If I share a secret with you and you share it with Lawrence and we pass it around this room, by the time it gets back to me, it's foreign to what I said.
Sure.
So the information does not pass accurately.
Yeah.
So the time that the doctor needs to spend to actually ensure that they're sharing information in a way that a person understands, and not just saying, take two Panadol 3 times a day, next patient. Because if an explanation isn't given, if information isn't shared, because what you as the medical practitioner is doing at that point, you're literally attempting to erode, if that person is 30 years old or 80 years old, 30 or 80 years worth of misinformation or misdirected information. Someone else is trying to...
Yeah. Is that a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And while we get the mic across, that's also the challenge for us as healthcare practitioners. We want to spend time with patients, but the demand for care, as it continues to increase, today in the U.S., you're only allowed one complaint, and you only have a finite amount of time to actually discuss that complaint, because you have one practitioner, and I've spoken a lot about the healthcare workforce and the deficit that exists. I was told that in 2019, the healthcare workforce had a deficit of 43 million people. 43 million in 2019. And then the pandemic comes around, and 32% of those who are working say, I no longer want to do medicine anymore. So when you think of that that healthcare workforce deficit and the sheer volume of work that a doctor needs and the ground he or she needs to cover, I believe that what needs to happen, Henry, is that there needs to be consistency in information, but that information is not just doctors who can do it, though. You see, and this is why for me it's important that leaders
as well. Information has to be consistent.
And I'm going to, I'm happy that Desiree has the mic, because the next thing we're going to talk to is about the religious community and the role that they need to play as well, in terms of, that, and I always challenge, I don't get invited very often, because when I go, I always say, that this is that.
I would say as well, every man has that responsibility, right? And we have to take responsibility for our health care and stop looking for the easy way out, right?
Yeah.
Eating healthy is difficult. Eating unhealthy is easy, right? Wake up that extra half an hour and prepare something to eat for lunch, rather than run around the corner and buy something quickly.
But that unhealthy meal is so much more accessible.
It's accessible.
And affordable. And unfortunately, I'll tell you, I have patients who come to me, I say to them, why don't you eat and they say to me, try feeding the 5 kids I have at home this broccoli and stuff you're recommending, as opposed to 3 of the Fritz bread that is $7 and so on. That is $21, and believe me, the kids are full by the end of that. Give them broccoli and so on. Half an hour later, I will be needing to.
And it doesn't have to be broccoli. It could be spinach
or whatever. It's healthy for protein. So
you could plant a spinach tree in your yard.
There you go. To Desiree.
So my question, before we stray too far from the explanation and the knowledge, I would like you to take us back to the basics. And I'm speaking specifically to the persons who have never gone and gotten a prostate examination. What is their expectation? Why should they go? What should they expect when they get there? And then in terms of the results, what range of results are of concern to the doctor?
Absolutely.
Because at the end of it, we really want persons to go and access the care that's available.
Absolutely. So those are great questions, and I think it's a good way to actually begin to wrap up the show, because we're some 5 minutes in terms of time left. So again, I want to recap, and Dean Callanan spoke to the idea that many men don't even know what a prostate is, and why sometimes when you urinate, for example, that you may not attach your urine. As I age, I'll tell you that if one thing I look is how far I can pee. I pee in the open, in nice public, not public, in a non-public place. And that's sort of just is my own check to see how far, because that for me is an important measure of of prostatic health, right? If my urine begins to fall too close to my shoes, then I'm concerned, or I have to wait for a while for my urine to actually, and on a day when I know my bladder is full, but it cannot empty readily, or even not void completely, where after I've left, I continue to dribble still because my bladder has not voided completely. Those are all signs. Those are all telltale signs of prostatic health, right? And sometimes, but men unfortunately attach erectile dysfunction or misfunction to the prostatic health. That is what they come in for. That for them, either it's taking a little longer to get an erection. The erection is not as you don't have a grade 4 erection as it's referred to, right? Or you can't keep an erection for very long, even when you are in a healthy relationship, romantic relationship. That's why people come for the prostate more often than not, and sometimes the two are just not related, right? So those are the things that I think you want to look at, but also as well to the predisposition. My friend over here said that at 92 years his grandfather had, and I'm not sure what was done, whether any tests were done, but he had an enlarged prostate that required some catheterization at some point, and he may or may not have had some cells in there that were already going in the other direction from a mitotic standpoint. So if a patient comes to me at the age of 40 or above, and I don't go 15 anymore, 40, because earlier I will do no harm doing a digital rectal examination on a 41-year-old. I will do harm by not doing it. So I always err on the side of caution. And if you come to me, we have to do the prostate check. If you don't do the prostate check, then I cannot get you around to having done that digital exam, because that is, for me, one of the most important tests, right? I would do a PSA 4, which is the prostate-specific antigen, which means that the prostate is now beginning to release something in the blood that shows that there's some reaction taking place. There's an inflammatory reaction taking place, and that may not always mean that this is prostate cancer. As I said, a prostatitis, which is an inflammation of the prostate, can actually cause the PSA levels to rise. But if I see a PSA level that is between 4 and 11, and it's reasonably above 11, suddenly I'm a little more suspicious. I want to know exactly what is happening there. I will treat you with a course of antibiotics. I'll bring you back in a month or two. I'll repeat your PSA check, but I want to feel your prostate myself. Because if I feel a prostate and the surface of it is not smooth and it's not nicely firm to the touch, but it is hard and it is nodular, I feel nodules on it, I start getting suspicious. For me, the next step is not just the PSA, but you want to get a biopsy of the prostate done. And because the prostate is such an interesting space, you may actually poke that prostate and pull out some samples, and you may not get the exact area where the cancer is, and you look at under a microscope and you don't see any. So right now, what has happened, and there are different schools of thought on this, because right now we move from 10 and 11 cylinders of samples that you took 21 cylinders. So it means that 21 pokes in different areas of the prostate, simply because there are areas. You see cases of individuals who have had recurrent cancer, and when you actually look, and thankfully there's great scans right now. There's a PET scan, which is positive emission tomography, but specific for the prostate. It's called a PMS, right? A PET PMS, which is a prostate membrane specific test, which actually shows you heat signals exactly where there is cancer in the prostate. And we don't have that locally, but that is already available, right?
So men have PMS too.
Well, right. So those tests. So if you have that, we can do a good biopsy here, and you take 21 cylinders and you take different samples and you look at that to see whether there are any cells that are already showing that type of mitotic division that's going to be of an issue. And before you did radiotherapy, that means that you actually try to penetrate that prostate with waves, and it caused a lot of damage because you penetrate through the blood and everything, and it causes damage all throughout. Today there's brachytherapy, where you actually implant the radioisotopes right directly into the prostate itself. So that is very localized in terms of the treatment. So there are a lot of advances in terms of prostate cancer. But the one that really gets people is the benign prostatic hypertrophy. A lot more dramatic in terms of the symptoms. My brother spoke about the catheterization. I don't like catheterizing people with a big prostate, because trying to pass that catheter. Remember I said the prostate, if it's the urethra, the tube that passes the urine, the prostate surrounds it a bit. And as that prostate goes bigger, it begins to squeeze that tube.
Take care of yourselves. The only way you can take care of yourself so you can take care of others is to have someone who understands the body. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Get yourselves checked. And listen to your doctor.
And your wives. And your
wives. Listen to your body.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us for this show. There's so many other men issues. We haven't touched mental health just yet. We haven't touched the other, diabetes and hypertension. We haven't touched erectile dysfunction. We haven't touched a number of things that are still very important. We're speaking prostate health for more reasons than one. It hits close to home. The incidence of prostatic disease and prostate cancer is rising in our society, and not just that, but the deaths that are in so many ways preventable. Those statistics are continuing to rise. So until next time, thank you for staying with us, and all the best. And listen to these two gentlemen. Listen to your prostate. Listen to your body, and get those checks done. If you haven't done that yet for this year, make this a Christmas gift to yourself. See your doctor, get checked out, ask for a PSA. Thank you. Bye-bye.